What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 10 waiver wire targets heading into week 13 of the NFL season. These are going to be players that are rostered in 40% or fewer leagues. We're only a couple of weeks away from the fantasy playoffs, so kind of some last-minute additions help you make that final push, or guys that could potentially crack your lineup when you actually get there. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But I actually want to start it off with kind of just like a general grouping of players, and that is going to be the elite handcuffs or just handcuffs in general. So I think the big names would be like Blake Corum, Brian Robinson Jr., Tyler Algier. I think when it comes to those handcuff options, those guys are definitely top tier. But pretty much every season, as you get later and later on in the year, it's less and less likely that you find just like really strong production on the waiver wire. Obviously, injuries can still pop up. Guys could still emerge. But just as you get later and later on, you're having less and less breakouts. And the handcuff running backs are really the players that do come with a lot of upside. Because it's like, yeah, you could pick up this one random running back that had, better usage this week than last week. But if they're still in a committee, they're not going to be league winners for you. Guys like Brian Robinson Jr., Blake Corum, Tyler Algier, if their stud RB1 goes down ahead of them, all of a sudden they are going to be weekly running back one plays. Like if Kyron Williams goes down, the Rams are very likely going to force feed Blake Corum on a great offense. Same thing with B-Rob. Same thing with Tyler Algier. And so if you're not like banking on one of these players cracking your lineup in this specific week, then I do think these are the upside swings that you should be rostering on your bench, especially, later in the season. There's not going to be bye weeks. You're fine with, the core you have plus a couple of depth options. Now, moving into someone that I do think is benefiting from an injury, we have Devin Neal, who is rostered in 1.8% of leagues. Alvin Kamara came into this game already banged up. He had been limited in practice, wasn't fully healthy, and then he goes out in week 12 and suffers a knee sprain. So all of a sudden, Devin Neal steps in, has strong usage, 7 carries for only 18 yards, but the receiving usage was pretty encouraging. 6 targets, 5 receptions for 43 yards. What's kind of funny about this is like obviously Alvin Kamara, I think like his biggest strength is his receiving upside, and his receiving has just been brutal all season long. All of a sudden Kamara goes down, and Devin Neal, who like is a fine pass catcher, but I wouldn't say that's like his bread and butter or some sort of like elite trait, he steps in and has this really strong receiving day. He was actually the only other running back who logged a touch in this game outside of Alvin Kamara. Now, that is a little bit screwy because they went to Taysom Hill a lot on the ground, and I mean a lot. 11 carries for Taysom Hill for 17 yards. Now, I'm not just going to look at the yards per carry and be like, oh, Taysom Hill was bad, because a lot of those are like short yardage situations near the goal line. But man, it was like they'd get into the red zone. It'd be 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, 3rd and goal, 4th and goal, and they're just running Taysom Hill up the middle to like no success. And like I know Taysom Hill has been a really fun option near the goal line, but he's coming off a torn ACL. The dude is, I want to say, like 35 years old. Like he's getting up there in age, and I just feel like this Taysom Hill goal line weapon gimmick needs to end because it's just not being super productive. And also fantasy wise, that would obviously help Devin Neal. So if Kamara misses time here, you could be looking at Devin Neal as the running back one for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. And if this is an injury that's, has a 2 to 3 to 4 week, timetable to return, then you're getting to the last few weeks of the season. And it's like, are we rushing Alvin Kamara back? Like, what's even the purpose of it? So Devin Neal, all of a sudden, someone who is fantasy relevant. Then I want to talk about someone who's returning from an injury, and that is Jayden Reed, rostered in 38.5% of leagues. He was designated this past week to return from IR with his foot and shoulder injuries. Didn't end up playing in week 12, but I think it's very possible he makes his return in week 13. And I'm just someone who's a big fan of Jayden Reed. He was super productive in his first 2 seasons, 13.6 and 11.6 PPR points per game. He came in, he produced right away. I think he's been almost a little bit underutilized in this offense, where I think he can do a little bit more than just like the super gimmicky touches that they kind of give him consistently. But you just look at this wide receiver room, right? And Romeo Doubs has had some decent games. He's kind of fallen off over the last couple. Christian Watson has been fine, but he's never going to be like a high volume target earner. Matthew Golden's now banged up, but is also just not been super exciting. And also Matthew Golden is not going to be some sort of high volume target earner. So all of a sudden Jayden Reed stepping in. There's no Tucker Kraft. He's proven to be this big play, explosive threat, just get the ball into his hands. So all of a sudden he's someone who I do think could emerge as being startable. And when we're looking at the fantasy playoffs, I would not be shocked if Jayden Reed was the most valuable pass catcher on this Packers offense, and he just barely made the cut, rostered in 38.5% of leagues. So Jayden Reed, definitely someone who I think is worth a pickup if he is out there. Then let's talk about some running backs, and this one's kind of a bummer. This is going to be Bhayshul Tuten, rostered in 29.7% of leagues. I really liked Bhayshul Tuten as a prospect, really liked him as a late round dart, a sleeper in fantasy football for redraft this season. And, he had been fine operating as the running back too, nothing crazy. But then he comes out in week 11, and it looks like there's a shakeup in this backfield, right? Before he left with that ankle injury, he was leading the team, leading Travis Etienne in carries, and looked good, was efficient on those opportunities, got a goal line carry, so things were looking up. And typically when a rookie running back makes that type of push, they're normally not then conceding carries rest of season. Typically they're a big factor moving forward, and they don't just completely lose it. But it does seem like that ankle injury just came at a really bad time. And this is the second just really bad injury timing for a Jaguars rookie, where Travis Hunter looked very poised for a monster breakout coming out of the bye week, and then he suffers the season-ending injury in practice. So this is the second time we've seen this, because in week 12, the usage was just not there. He took 7 of the 23 running back carries. He only played in 13 of the 62 snaps, and then he also just didn't produce with those opportunities, 7 carries for 17 yards. And then, contrast to that, Travis Etienne had a monster game, both on the ground and through the air. And so I don't think all hope is lost here for Bhayshul Tuten. Just a week ago, they were very willing to have this pretty much be a 50-50 split, maybe even leaning towards the direction of Bhayshul Tuten. And I talked about with those handcuffs, I'd still consider Tuten to be an elite handcuff at the very worst. But definitely the vibes are lower than they were after last week. A running back that I think is definitely more playable just in the very, very short term if you're desperate. Chris Rodriguez rostered in 8.8% of leagues. Despite him having really strong usage in week 11, the fact that the Commanders run a week 12 bye, it's possible that he was not picked up just because when you look at the players, right, and you're sorting by projected, he wouldn't have popped up because they weren't playing this week. But week 11 looked like he kind of took over this backfield, 15 carries for 79 yards. He was the clear leader in touches. The problem, though, is just it's not a super valuable role, right? There's limited receiving upside. You've got Jeremy McNichols, who's getting the third down snaps, running a lot of routes. And so you're banking on touchdowns, but it's just not a good offense. And maybe Jayden Daniels comes back and that improves things. But then I still think it's volatile rest of season. If Ja'Cory or, Bill Krosky-Merritt retook the running back one role, I wouldn't be shocked. He struggled, but I don't think Chris Rodriguez is some sort of undeniable talent. So fine, short-term streaming running back 3 play, but not someone who I'm going to get over my skis on. Then these next few players, it's going to be a bunch of rookie wide receivers. If you guys follow my channel and just kind of understand the trajectory of some of these rookies, you want to buy in when these guys start to show flashes. We've seen year after year, some of these players have these really nice second half breakouts and then go on to become league winners. I think most notably with some of these dudes, right, that did very little early on in the season, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a non-factor, and then just goes on a complete tear over the second half. And so these are guys who I think could be candidates for that. I'll start it off with Luther Burden, rostered in 7.5% of leagues. Last week, we saw him stuff Olamide Zaccheaus in the locker, right? Took over his wide receiver 3 routes. That usage held steady in week 12. He was targeted 5 times, caught 3 of them for 46 yards, also added a carry for 15 yards. And I feel like I say this a lot, I'm very confident that Luther Burden is a very good player. I am starting to lose some of my optimism that it's this specific year where he has that massive breakout and is super fantasy relevant. And that's not to say I don't want him rostered, because I certainly do. I could be wrong. But at this point, it's just the Bears' targets, their production is just so dispersed between their top few weapons, right? So in this week 12 game, for example, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Colston Loveland, Luther Burden. They all had between 45 and 65 receiving yards, and they all had between 3 and 5 receptions. And so you just never know whose week it's going to be. You never know if the offense is going to have a big game overall. And so we'll see if Luther Burden can, really kind of have that true late season huge breakout. I think the real bummer in this game was that like DJ Moore was super productive because Moore had done nothing in the past 2 weeks. And it's like, man, can Burden just like jump DJ Moore on the depth chart? After this game, that doesn't seem super likely, but still a talented young player on a fun offense, someone who I would definitely want on my bench over some other random player, like some veteran wide receiver who's never going to crack your lineup. This next guy is definitely a more shocking rookie breakout, and that is Chimere Dike, who is rostered in 11.9% of leagues. He ran the wide receiver 1 routes in week 12, had a 90% route participation, and in his last 5 games, he's just been pretty productive. He's logged some really nice performances. So 4 for 70 and a touchdown, 7 for 93, 1 for 5, 2 for 14, 5 for 44 and a touchdown. And then on top of, 3 of those big games in the last 5, he's also logged 2 return touchdowns during that stretch, which, I wouldn't say like, oh, I'm playing Chimere Dike in my lineup because I think he's going to return a touchdown. But it's just the fact that like, he looks like a legitimate player. Like early on in the season, it was like Alec Manor as like their day 3 rookie wide receiver, right? Like the guy who looked really good. It seems like Chimere Dike has kind of snatched his chain at this point and has logged some really nice performances. And just the fact that like he is scoring return touchdowns, he just looks like a solid player. He's going to be a guy in this league. Is he someone who's super relevant for fantasy? We'll wait and see rest of season. But on an offense that really needs weapons, Cam Ward didn't look terrible, I guess, in this Week 12 game. Maybe he's someone who does have that emergence. Then we've got Jayden Higgins rostered in 23.3% of leagues, and it was looking pretty bleak for these Texans rookie wide receivers, more so Jaylen Noel, but it also wasn't looking great for Higgins. Last 3 games, 3 productive stat lines, 5 for 42 and a touchdown, 4 for 55, 4 for 38 and a touchdown. And this past week, like it could have been a bigger game, had some major issues getting his feet down near the sideline. But he also kind of pulled away in routes from both Xavier Hutchinson and Christian Kirk. Higgins ran 21 routes to Hutchinson's 12 and to Christian Kirk's 13. That's really been like the biggest barrier for both him and Noel, is that the Texans have just been like so committed to, giving these opportunities to Hutchinson, to Kirk. And now they're finally kind of pivoting that usage to Jayden Higgins. I've talked about this with Jaylen Noel. I don't think it's going to happen for him this season. I actually think I might be more confident that like Jaylen Noel is a very good NFL player than Jayden Higgins. But like for this specific fantasy season, Higgins is the guy that's actually getting the routes to showcase it. And we'll see if he can keep it rolling moving forward. And then the final rookie, Tez Johnson, rostered in 26.4% of leagues. This was just an awful Bucs offensive performance. I mean, they just got, flat out embarrassed by the Rams on both sides of the ball. They only had 103 total passing yards. Baker dealing with the shoulder injury. But for how bad the offense was, Tez Johnson, not the worst fantasy day, all things considered. 4 targets, 3 receptions for 21 yards and a touchdown. Also added 2 carries for 12 yards. Chris Godwin really getting eased back in, only 42% of the routes. Tez Johnson was the wide receiver 2 in routes at 84%. And kind of similar to some of these other dudes, am I positive Tez Johnson is going to be someone you want to start in the next 2 weeks into the playoffs? I'm not sure, but if Baker can get healthy, Chris Godwin, like, at least in this specific season, it just doesn't seem like he's going to be the guy for fantasy. And Tez Johnson has logged some solid games. Once again, when these young, rookie players show some signs of life, they start to break out, you just want to buy in because you could have that next, like, Amon-Ra St. Brown to close. And obviously that's, like, very high end of the peak there. Then let's talk about, I think, my only tight end in this video, Brenton Strange, rostered in 10.9% of leagues. Believe I talked about him last week. Came off of IR with the big game, 5 targets, 5 receptions for 93 yards, 71% route participation. He's actually scored at least 10 plus PPR points in his last 3 healthy games, and that's without getting into the end zone. So like consistently getting 40 plus receiving yards. I want Trevor Lawrence to be better. Like, I want to support the dude. He's just rough. But he does have some solid chemistry with Brenton Strange. So someone who's very relevant as like a fringe tight end one who in 90% of leagues could just be sitting out there on waivers. Another Jaguar here with Parker Washington, rostered in 20.2% of leagues. Definitely more of like a short-term desperate flex play, potentially deeper leagues. But week 12 is actually his best game of the season. 5 receptions for 71 yards and a touchdown. He scored double-digit PPR points in 4 of his last 5. Now, it's very possible this like kind of wide receiver room group of weapons starts to get overcrowded with BTJ nearing a return. Who's going to be the odd man out? Like, who's the wide receiver 3 between BTJ, Jacoby Myers, Parker Washington? I think when you just like kind of have the names from like the preseason right, you're like, well, it's obviously going to be Parker Washington, who's the odd man out. BTJ was their stud wide receiver. Jacoby Myers, right? They trade from at the deadline, super productive. Washington has been really good and BTJ has been straight up awful. And so I'm not positive that like BTJ is just going to come in and take over his, former usage, especially because this is a different regime. This is not, the coaching staff or the front office that actually drafted him here. Now, all that being said, Parker Washington, I don't think is going to be some sort of savior on your team. But like I said, deeper leagues, deeper starting lineups could be someone who is relevant. And then someone who's probably more relevant in very deep leagues, but did kind of just want to give him a shout out here. John Metchie, rostered in under 1% of leagues with the Jets. Back-to-back really strong performances, 3 for 45 and a touchdown, 6 for 66 and a touchdown. And him and Adonai Mitchell, like, shout out to the Jets, right? They're not a good team. They're not a good offense. Their wide receiver room without Garrett Wilson is terrible, but they're just leaning into like these younger wide receivers, which I think is the right thing, right? No one needs to see Allen Lazard run 80+% of the routes. And so they're giving those routes to Metchie and to Mitchell. And Metchie's come through. Mitchell's been, all right, not great, but Metchie has been productive. Tyrod is fine at quarterback. There's just no weapons here. And so he's going to get a decent amount of targets. And so far he has produced on those opportunities. That is going to wrap it up for all my top targets. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.